The crowd booed before he even started his engine. "Get that rust bucket off the field!" someone shouted from the bleachers. The old Pitts Special sat on the tarmac like a wounded bird, its paint faded and patchy. Duct tape held the wingtip together. Oil stains spread beneath the fuselage like dark tears. Jake Morrison climbed into the cockpit anyway. 23 years old, flying since he was 16. No sponsors, no team, no money. Just him and a plane that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not at the regional airshow championship. The announcer's voice crackled over the PA system. "Next up, flying the, a pause, papers rustling. The 1974 Pitts Special, Jake Morrison from Cedar Falls." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd of 8,000. Someone threw a paper cup. It bounced off the wing. Jake's hands shook as he strapped himself in. The leather harness was his father's, cracked and worn smooth from years of use. He pressed his palm against the instrument panel. The metal was warm from the sun. "This is for you, Dad," he whispered. The engine coughed to life. Black smoke belched from the exhaust. More laughter from the stands. A child pointed and asked his mother why the plane was so ugly. Jake taxied to the runway. His radio crackled. "Morrison, you're cleared for takeoff. Try not to crash." The tower controller's joke wasn't funny. 3 pilots had already performed flawless routines in their sleek, sponsored aircraft. $1 million machines that gleamed like jewels in the afternoon sun. The crowd had roared for each one. Now they waited to watch the underdog fail. Jake pushed the throttle forward. The engine screamed. The plane lurched down the runway, shaking like it might fall apart. At 60 miles per hour, he pulled back on the stick. The Pitts leaped into the sky like it had been shot from a cannon. Everything changed in that moment. The plane that had looked clumsy on the ground transformed into something magical. Jake rolled inverted and held it, flying upside down just 50 feet above the crowd. The engine sang now instead of coughing, clean and pure and powerful. A woman in the front row stopped texting. She looked up. Jake pulled into a vertical climb, the nose pointed straight at the sun. At the peak, he cut the engine. Complete silence. The plane hung motionless for one impossible second, balanced on nothing but momentum and prayer. Then he pushed forward into a falling leaf spin, the aircraft tumbling end over end like an autumn leaf. The engine roared back to life. He pulled out at 200 feet. A man in Section C stood up, then another. Jake rolled into a Cuban 8, the plane tracing a perfect figure in the sky. Smoke poured from the wingtips now, white trails that spelled poetry against the blue. He flew knife-edge passes. The aircraft balanced on its side, wings perpendicular to the earth. The crowd fell silent. Even the hot dog vendors stopped selling. For his finale, Jake climbed to 3,000 feet. He cut the engine again. The propeller windmilled to a stop. He pushed the nose down into a steep dive, aiming straight for the runway. 500 feet. 400. 300. A woman screamed. At 200 feet, Jake pulled the stick back with everything he had. The plane bottomed out of the dive and climbed again, engine still dead, carried by pure momentum. At the peak of the climb, he restarted the engine with a thunderclap that shook the grandstands. The crowd exploded. 8,000 people on their feet, cheering, whistling, applauding until their hands hurt. Jake waggled his wings and landed, taxiing back to his parking spot near the maintenance hangar. He shut down the engine. His hands were shaking again, but not from nerves this time, from adrenaline. from joy, from the knowledge that he'd just flown the routine of his life in front of the biggest crowd he'd ever seen. He climbed out of the cockpit. A small group had gathered around his plane. Kids, mostly, and a few adults who looked like pilots themselves. They stared at the old Pitts with new respect. "That was incredible," a teenage girl said. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Jake started to answer, but stopped. A man in a dark suit was walking toward him. Older, silver hair, military bearing. Behind him came two more men, both wearing the blue uniforms of commercial airline pilots. The crowd parted as they approached. The silver-haired man stopped 3 feet from Jake. He studied the young pilot's face for a long moment. His eyes were gray and serious. "What's your name, son?" "Jake Morrison, sir." The man's expression changed. His eyes widened slightly. "Morrison, from Cedar Falls?" "Yes, sir." "What was your father's name?" Jake's throat tightened. "Captain Michael Morrison. He died in Afghanistan 7 years ago." The silver-haired man took a step back. He looked at the plane, then back at Jake. "My God," he whispered. One of the airline pilots leaned forward. "Sir, do you know him?" The older man nodded slowly. "I know his father." He extended his hand to Jake. "I'm General William Hayes, United States Air Force, retired. Your father saved my life." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at the general, unable to speak. "We were flying convoy protection in the Kandahar province," General Hayes continued. "2 F-16s. I took ground fire and lost hydraulics. Your father talked me through an emergency landing. Stayed with me on the radio for 40 minutes while I brought a damaged aircraft down in the middle of nowhere." Jake's vision blurred. He'd never heard this story. "After I landed, insurgents attacked the forward operating base where your father was stationed. He volunteered to fly close air support in an A-10, single aircraft, no backup." The general's voice grew quiet. "He saved 60 Marines that day, but his plane took a direct hit from a surface-to-air missile on his second pass. The crowd around them had grown larger. People pressed closer to listen. Your father was the finest pilot I ever served with," General Hayes said, "and the bravest man I ever knew. That routine you just flew, those were his moves, his signature maneuvers. The falling leaf spin, the dead stick climb. I watched him practice them 1,000 times at Nellis Air Force Base." Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "He taught me to fly in this plane. Every weekend from the time I was 12 until I was 16. Then he deployed and never came home." The general finished the sentence gently. "The plane was in storage for 5 years after he died. My mom couldn't bear to look at it. I finally convinced her to let me restore it last year. Took me 18 months, working nights and weekends. I used his logbooks, his maintenance records. I wanted to fly it exactly the way he did." General Hayes walked to the plane and ran his hand along the fuselage. This old bird was his trainer when he was a young lieutenant. He bought it surplus from the Air Force in 1985. Flew it in air shows for 15 years before he switched to military aircraft. He turned back to Jake. "Son, do you know what today is?" Jake shook his head. "It's the 7th anniversary of your father's death. To the day." The words settled over the crowd like a blanket. Someone sniffled. A child asked his mother why everyone was crying. General Hayes reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "The Air Force has been looking for you for 3 years. Your father was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions in Afghanistan." Your mother moved. and we lost track of your family." He handed the box to Jake. "This belongs to you." Jake opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, nested in blue velvet, was a bronze medal shaped like a four-bladed propeller. The inscription read, "For heroism and extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight." "There's something else," General Hayes said. He nodded to one of the airline pilots, who stepped forward. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, United Airlines. We've been authorized to offer you a full scholarship to our pilot training program. If you're interested, you could be flying commercial aircraft within 2 years." Jake stared at him. I don't understand." "Your father put in a request before his final deployment," Captain Rodriguez explained. "He asked us to look after his son if anything happened to him. It took us 7 years to find you, but we never forgot." The second pilot stepped forward. "I'm Captain Williams, American Airlines. We're prepared to make the same offer. Full training, guaranteed placement upon completion." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him. 8,000 people had gone quiet. The only sound was the wind through the wings of his father's plane. "There's one condition," General Hayes said with a slight smile. "You have to promise to keep flying this old bird. The world needs to see what real flying looks like." Jake laughed through his tears. "Yes, sir. I promise." The crowd erupted again. This time it wasn't just applause. It was something deeper. Recognition. Respect. Love for a young man who had honored his father's memory in the most beautiful way possible. As the sun set behind the grandstands, Jake stood beside his father's plane, the Distinguished Flying Cross heavy in his hands. The general had been right. This was more than coincidence. This was meant to be. He looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere up there, he knew his father was watching. And for the first time in 7 years, Jake felt like he wasn't flying alone. The old Pitts Special sat quietly on the tarmac, its patched paint glowing in the twilight. It didn't look like a rust bucket anymore. It looked like what it had always been. A legend's wings passed down to the next generation, ready to fly again.